Today I'm going to talk about benefit enrollment decision making and education. In this presentation, I'll cover objectives, methodology, findings, communication, audience segmentation, recommendations, and the executive summary. Let's start with the objectives. The first objective was to determine the ideal role for educational tools in support of voluntary benefits. The second was to understand the various touchpoints and the key influencers of behavior, specifically looking at those phases around open enrollment. The last objective was to segment employees into groups to determine optimal vehicles and timing to introduce benefit education materials. So, let's take a look at the methodology. In November 2014, we conducted focus groups to help inform the quantitative part of this research. I was looking to determine the decision-making processes individuals go through when they're deciding whether or not they want to participate in supplemental benefits. I was especially interested in the pre-announcement, HR announcement, and open enrollment moment of selection periods. I also looked at attitudinal, behavioral, and demographic information in order to do audience segmentation. Additionally, respondents were screened for this portion of the study to ensure they met the criteria to participate appropriately in this research. Now I'd like to share the findings and the decision-making process. Looking at these three phases, the pre-announcement, HR announcement, and open enrollment moment of selection period, engagement was pretty different across the interviewed audiences. From this information, I put together a customer journey map for each phase of the decision-making process. So let's look at the customer journey mapping. The customer journey map is pretty extensive. I started with the pre-announcement period and went all the way through to the moment of selection. Throughout the survey, I gathered the information and I dropped it into this mapping to show where people are at certain periods in the enrollment process. It's a busy slide, but once you see the remaining slides that break it down for each period, it'll seem a lot easier to understand as we go through it. First, we'll cover the pre-HR announcement period. Several key themes emerged from the research that I conducted. Death of a family member, receiving a promotion, or injury or illness were the predominant reasons people were thinking about these types of benefits. Also, people who were thinking about them were having the conversations with spouses. They were looking at previous materials and information from the insurance company. Value versus cost was the primary thing that people were really evaluating. Significant life events really are the main reason people consider purchasing these products. And if something has happened directly to a family member or a close friend, that has a really big impact on whether people consider these products. Promotion is another life event that occurred during the past year for many participants, but that didn't seem to have any kind of an impact on whether they would select these benefits. During the pre-announcement period, over 3/4 of the participants did not give thought as to what benefits they would or would not elect during enrollment. I thought that was quite interesting. But they did give a lot of thought to medical and dental insurance, which seemed to really drive the majority of consideration around this time. And although people were exposed to communications around these benefits, 50% said it had a moderate, and the remaining 50% said it had very little impact on whether they started thinking about supplemental benefits. Let's look at the HR announcement period. During this phase, most respondents were receiving email communications, and about half were gathering information about their voluntary benefit offerings. Key touch points, again, were conversations with spouses and partners, search engines, company websites, and conversations with friends. Just diving a little deeper, 80% began thinking about their benefit selections when that announcement came out from their HR departments. And conversations with spouses and company websites were the most common sources of information. They had the most impact or facilitated the thoughts on whether people were going to purchase or not. And only 17% of respondents experienced something during this period that really had an impact on their thoughts around these benefits. Also, the majority of respondents said they were not absolutely certain of the voluntary benefits they were going to choose during the open enrollment period, so there was no shift there. Now, let's compare the open enrollment phase with these previous two phases. Again, an email announcement is the predominant method of communication, and people really are starting to look at their voluntary benefits. They're still having conversations with their spouse, looking at the company website, talking to their coworkers, and looking at the website of insurance carriers for more information on these benefits. 43% of respondents said during this phase that they proactively gathered information. That's 7% lower than in the previous phase. And those in their 20s are more likely to have a conversation with their spouse or partner at this stage more than their older counterparts, which I find to be very interesting. I also asked about the time they make their selections, and 86% said they make them all at one time. 43% said they were absolutely certain of the voluntary benefits they would select at the time they sat down to make their election. So that's under half of the respondents that know during enrollment time. I also looked at the way people evaluate the worth of these benefits, and 50% look at that cost per paycheck. The other 17% look at the level of coverage they need, while 1 in 3 do nothing to consider the value and benefits of these types of products, which is really shocking when these can be so important to protecting people's income. It's time for the fun part, the audience segmentation. Looking at the research, 5 segments emerged representing how employees arrive at their voluntary benefit decisions: value-driven, information-seeking, emerging, maturing, and the traditionalist, although the traditionalist was not a very high portion of the participants in this study. The value-driven group is a very diverse group, but there are some major barriers to overcome. These people struggle to identify what voluntary benefits are good for them in their current situation. They need a better understanding, and they also have become very frugal and focus on the value of what they're purchasing. Information seekers are the next pretty decent sized group, and I would say I fall into this group. But the major barriers that we need to overcome with them are they're not as knowledgeable about the process and what the right benefits are for their life stage, and they need to be made to feel comfortable with their decisions, which is pretty prevalent across all groups. The next group is what I've termed the emerging group. This group has the highest proportion of millennials. They are the youngest segment. The major barriers with this group is the fact that they do switch jobs quite frequently, so they don't think of making these selections, and they really are looking at that cost, value, benefit of these products. The maturing group is an interesting group. They are very diverse in age, and a majority of them are married, but they are the least knowledgeable about the enrollment process, and they are very intimidated by all the information they are given. So it makes it very difficult for them to make decisions about these voluntary benefits. Last but not least are the traditionalists. This is the older of the segments, but this group is interesting because they won't seek out information. They're going to choose the same benefits year over year, so they're a really tough sell. They really should be looking at their benefits every year to see if something's new or has changed. On to communication and how it's perceived. Over half of employees are extremely or somewhat satisfied with the amount of information they're giving during enrollment and at the moment of selection. I find that quite interesting simply because many people who were surveyed said that they find these voluntary benefits somewhat confusing, and they're not sure what they mean in the long run. Also, employees would appreciate more information on the outcome value of the voluntary benefits, meaning the cost per paycheck and the expectation of the potential payout. I think what employees want to know is, if I'm going to pay into this product, what am I going to get out of it, and is it worth it in the long run? I also found this really interesting. At the start of enrollment, 71% of respondents said that they reviewed the communications immediately. This shows that employees are open to receiving information and communication on supplemental benefits. With that in mind, let's move on to the recommendations I put together. The Hartford needs to be more involved in communicating directly with employees, and businesses need to let them communicate with employees so employees get the right information in a timely manner. Also, the information needs to be more personally relevant and show how the benefits will provide value over time. Furthermore, it's really important to make sure that the messaging is aimed at those particular life stages or life events that make people think about these voluntary benefits more deeply. Also, the decision touch points have different effects on the certainty of the selections made. And as employees are moving through the enrollment journey, they become less proactive about seeking information, so it becomes even more important to provide them with the best and most relevant information for them to make a decision. Employees are looking for ways to increase their knowledge, so let's give them personalized information. The Hartford can certainly drive better consideration and selection of the voluntary benefits by aligning the communication strategies and tactics around 3 specific types of the decision-making audiences that span 69% of the market: the value-driven, information-seeking, and emerging. Focusing on these 3 segments will allow the Hartford to better serve the important millennial generation. And the last 2 remaining segments offer some opportunity but are more difficult to engage in the process: the maturing and the traditionalists. The maturing because they're intimidated by all the information, and the traditionalists because they really don't pay any attention to what information is given to them. In summary, I believe that by leveraging a better understanding of the voluntary benefit decision process, the Hartford has a real opportunity to increase voluntary benefit sales. And segmenting the audiences and creating strategic communication and marketing plans for these audiences can help them better understand the benefits and take advantage of them. Furthermore, I believe that a holistic approach needs to be made in communicating benefits year-round, not just during the enrollment period. Also, during the HR announcement period, employees become more aware of the benefits and the impending decision that they need to make during enrollment, but they're still not fully engaged. However, they are proactively gathering information during this time, so it's important that that information is available to them. The open enrollment period and the moment of selection, clearly the employees are the most engaged during this time. So that information and that decision support needs to be at their fingertips. Overall, if you look at the segmented audiences, they need different things at different times, and the Hartford can capitalize by providing the information to these groups when they need it, how they need it, and the way they like to consume the information. In closing, thank you for your time and consideration.